Good morning, guys. This is Stephen Khuong here with Natalise and Jess. Unlikely Journey, episode 3. The topic this morning is about building wealth, and there's so much to talk about. So who wants to go first? I know, Natalise, you're up first.
You should have picked Jess first. Because I think the reality for me is that, I haven't been as thoughtful about it, admittedly so, as I have, as I maybe should be. I think being an artist, you don't, first of all, you don't go into being an artist to get rich. Like, you just don't pursue it. There are many other ways to get rich quickly. So, in terms of tips and tricks, I don't know if I have anything for you. I will say that my husband and I have gotten more into, investing into stocks. That's something that he leads on. But really, we're focusing on our entrepreneurial ventures too, as really a way of life. And I wouldn't even say like necessarily of wealth, because again, you don't go into being an entrepreneur. I think I read a book recently that said, if you want to get rich quickly, you really shouldn't be an entrepreneur. And so I don't know. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that's interesting because I've always conditioned myself to believe that if I want to get rich quickly, the only way to do it is through entrepreneurship. So I want to know what book you're reading because I want to investigate the opposite stance.
Yeah, I'll have to send it to you. But I think really the idea was that, if you work in finance, you are consistently making a high salary and you can put that money away and you can invest money. You can invest and you'll have it's a safer path to wealth. Whereas as an entrepreneur, yes, there are those stories. Yes, you can certainly go from 0 to 60 very quickly, but your chances of that happening are very low on average.
So I have a question here, which I just was like super curious to hear, like, and I love, Natalise, actually, that you went first, because I feel like we're almost putting the cart before the horse, because I love that we're talking about wealth as opposed to money or richness, right? And I think there actually are like multiple definitions to what wealth is. And I think that I don't know, I feel like I've had this new perspective recently. Like, I took a money seminar I told you guys about, and this guy Mark Devine, who I'm just obsessed with, I'm doing his Unbeatable Challenge. He's a Navy SEAL. He trains Navy SEAls, but he also he also trains corporations, and it's about like, it's about having a mindset to zero in on the targets and then the discipline to follow through. But there's also a lot of spirituality around it. Like, how do you maintain yourself in from a calm space when, ultimately you start making these big moves and, crises, bigger moves, bigger problems, basically. But he said this thing that really struck me. He said that the difference between wealth and health is that your why, right? It's one letter off, health and wealth. And with wealth, your why. And knowing your why means why you do anything that you do. So, for someone like me, like I consider myself incredibly wealthy, even though I have, a rent-controlled apartment in Hollywood that I love, is everything that I need. I've traveled all over the world. And my definition of wealth for me, for the last couple of years, has been experience. I want to be able to go to all of these places and check them off my bucket list. I want to stand on the Great Wall of China. I want to, go down a river in China and, see the Forbidden City. And, like, I don't know. I feel like wealth is such an interesting thing to think about, because there are the traditional ways of being rich. And this is why I would argue, Natalise, like against kind of, not against, but a different perspective with regards to what you're reading, which is like, sure, the traditional way is you get a finance job and you work your ass off, and then maybe someday you do all those things, but you're not guaranteed that someday time. You could retire and you have a disease, or, you get hit by a truck or a car, and then that trip you always wanted to take because you spent decades of your life saving up all this money and you can retire might not happen. So, I think in terms of monetary wealth, just money dollar for dollar, like, sure, it's a much more massive risk with entrepreneurship, but that time you have, that time and your ability to work on your own passion, that to me feels like a different definition of wealth. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
So what I'm hearing from you I believe, is this notion that as individuals, we need to define for ourselves what wealth is. That's first and foremost. For some people, it could be their balance sheet. For some people, it's a combination of mental and physical wellness mixed with like a steady income. And then for some other people, wealth could be the process of achieving greatness through taking a lot of risk. I think for myself, I've always been, and this is not a good thing, by the way, but I'll say this: I've always been in the mindset of like, it's never enough. Like, I need to achieve more. And that's also like really unhealthy thinking. But with that being said, I don't know, that personality kind of just drives me to feel like the universe is so great. There's so much abundance out there. And it's not necessarily about like trying to grab on or grasping onto all of these things, but it's like you said, Jess, there's a finite amount of time. And I really want to identify like what are the things that I want to experience before like my time's up. So I think from that perspective, this notion of taking risk is not as scary for me because I mean, for me, what's scary is like waking up and going to that finance job. Like I'd rather make less money knowing that I can experience a lot more and do different things and then potentially make more money versus like I don't know, I'm just deathly afraid of being stuck in the same experience. So that's my take.
Well, I mean, and I think also think about risk, right? Like, I think that risk was different for our generations before us, and we grew up in that kind of balance where, the ages that we the three of us are, where you get the job and that's the secure thing to do. But retirement packages have gone away. Like, part time culture is a whole other thing, and benefit packages are just shifting. So, you don't work at the same company with guaranteed pensions, and there isn't that long term security. So I would even say like this concept of risk for entrepreneurship, like, aside from me going to, a job like that where that would stress me out having to do that. But at the same time, also having all my eggs in one basket, that basket goes away. What am I left with? And, I don't know. I think if you have the mindset of being able to piece together, using your skill set, a couple of different things and really just look at yourself as the corporation or the business, that to me has always felt like a better bet than hoping that some company doesn't restructure and suddenly I'm obsolete.
No, that's a really really great point. So we are led to believe that having a job and working for a corporation or an established organization is something that's less risky. But you're absolutely right. Like, who's to say that next week they're not going to restructure and everybody's going to get laid off? The idea of investing in myself and me being that corporation or me being that um, having that mindset to be able to grow something from nothing, I think that's more security for me. I have a funny story to tell you. Before we founded Curacubby, the startup that I'm leading right now, one of my co-founders was like, he wasn't sure that he wanted to be in because he was like, this is super risky. Like he came from like a Fortune 500 company. He's like, he's been there for like 10 years, and he wasn't sure. He's like, this is super risky. What if this? What if that? And then, this is what I ultimately told him. I said, look, dude, you have been working in a very, very low risk position for a long time. You've made decent money. Think about the startup as like getting your MBA, legit getting your MBA, like from a street standard, just going out there and trying some things. And then also we're paying you. We're going to pay you like a modest salary to get your MBA. Once I told him that, he was like, oh, this sounds fun. I was like, it does. Like, the worst thing that can happen is like, no matter what, you're going to graduate. Like, if your startup exits, you've graduated. If your startup fails, you've graduated because you've learned a bunch of things. And then through that process, you're going to get hooked up and networked with so many people that if you're any sort of decent business person, you're going to build a firm enough relationship. You can network and ask for a position with someone that you've touched upon while you're doing your startup. So ultimately, that was a conversation that got him in. But yeah, I do. I agree with this notion that investing in yourself is like the least riskiest thing you can do. That's like probably the most stable thing. So I don't know, Natalise, what are your thoughts on that? Because you've actually went to business school, unlike the rest of us.
Well, first of all, my brain is turning, and just to touch back on just like what you said, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a hard it's not a hard thing to understand, but I think it's a hard thing to live. This idea that wealth is holistic. And, I have to remind myself of that all the time because I like I said, I've in my life, I've optimized for many other things like you have. But I think the world is not necessarily like on that same page all the time. And so you have to sort of remind yourself of why you're doing things. One thing that, as you guys were talking, I started thinking about maybe at the cost of being controversial. I don't know if I would make the same choices if I had kids today. And Steve, you're a father, and you're still an entrepreneur, and that's awesome. But I know a lot of people, like in my friend circles, who are really educated, could be really amazing entrepreneurs, but they haven't taken the leap because they have 2 kids and a wife and a mortgage, and they're scared to make that leap. So I don't know. I feel for that too.
That's a really
That's
great
really
point.
interesting.
Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
balance. That's a good balance to remember that at the end of the day is all contextual based on, your family circumstance and um, the goals that you want to attain in your personal life. Um, now, something Jess said that just made me turn on the light switch in my head. Um, like the economy, the state of the union, our political system, it is changing more rapidly and at a much higher rate now than it's ever been before. So a lot of the thoughts and cultural norms that we bring with us are, I mean, especially someone in my age, they're from decades ago. It's a lot different now, right? If you look at resumes, like back in the 2000s, if someone job hopped every 3 years, you'd be like, okay, this person's not stable. But now, if you look at a resume now, you almost don't expect anyone to be at a job for longer than 3 years, right? So that is a huge cultural change, and that really speaks a lot about change and stability, risk and rewards. Jess, I mean, what is it like down in LA in the music industry? Like, what is considered like a stable position for somebody? Like, how long of a tenure?
Oh my God. I mean, what's funny is like I've had been doing business recently with people who've been at their companies for 10, 15 years. It just kind of creeps up on them. Um, I mean, definitely never stable for the creatives. Some of these larger conglomerate labels that keep gobbling up smaller groups are pretty secure. They're publicly traded, basically copyright holders at that point, right? So there's definitely a mechanism in place that I think does provide some job security. And I will say, in our industry, and at least this will probably make you laugh, but it's in the executive side. I'm not saying there aren't a lot of amazing executives, there are, but it's the kind of thing where hype leads, and you can really fail up very successfully. So like there'll be musical chairs, but you look and this executive ended up in a higher position somewhere else, and you're like, wow, that's so interesting. Like it's this perception of your value, I think, a little bit more than maybe what you add, because of the fact that we're dealing in talent, and in that type of kind of IP, where if you have those connections, it's kind of at a certain level what people are looking for, and then a figurehead that has that kind of clout to run the company, whether or not they actually have the skills to do it. So, I mean, the music industry on the business side is definitely a bit of the Wild West, but for these bigger companies, I mean, like I said, I've seen people that have been in the same jobs for like 20, 15 years. So I definitely think that still stands. And, to speak to Natalise's point, like, look, I'm completely aware of the fact that an element of my privilege is that I don't have a family and I don't have kids, and I can't afford to be riskier, and I can't afford to maybe now be looking into financial literacy and building up some sort of nest egg, for myself. And thank God, not like 2 kids that I didn't plan college for, So I do think that it is just an element of choice, if you're lucky enough to have that choice at some point. But I don't think there's security anywhere. Maybe that's just my paranoia, but I just feel
I
like,
think you're right, Jess.
yeah, I don't think there's security
Like,
really. I think there's the illusion of
that's
security.
right. That's right.
But
If there was anything that COVID should have taught us, it's that there is no certainty.
right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, have you guys seen Nomadland?
Oh
The
my
one that
God,
won
no.
Best
No, I
Picture?
haven't
No, I
yet.
want to see it.
I mean, want is a strong word, I would say. Be prepared to be depressed. And it's like an interesting narrative because it doesn't really have a story arc. You're just kind of watching it. It's
Mm,
based off of this plant that closed. And it's kind of like to what we're speaking about, right? Like these people did everything right. And all of a sudden, this one stone wasn't being used anymore in building. And right outside of, in Nevada, right outside of the city, like this entire town just closed, the town, everything. And it was like God knows how many thousands of people had to be relocated and lost their jobs. And you're watching, the lead character, and she did an awesome performance, but you're just watching her not wanting to leave this area because it's her home, but not having anything left or any work, or like, I mean, just I don't know. I think the power in this is understanding, which again brings us back to our whole idea for this podcast and why I think we're drawn to this, is that what's that thing where they say like you make plans and God laughs? Like you really just have to be adaptable because COVID happens, like natural disasters happen, like wars happen, plants shut down. Like that can't be the end of your story.
So this idea about wealth building then really is a mindset more than anything else, is what I'm hearing, right? You can go to all of the best seminars and the best lectures and get the best mentors, but if your mind is not prepared to adapt to fast change, if your emotional well-being isn't stable enough to get up in the morning to turn the shades a different way so you can get some sunlight in your room, then none of this, you know, strategic, pragmatic stuff even works. Am I right?
Well, yeah, but I think I want to ask you guys, I think the first question, which is, what is wealth to each of you? Because you need to know that you need to know anything that you want in this life. You have to know what it is so you can head towards it. So, Natalise, what is wealth to you?
so a professor asked me a few months ago, what it was a really compelling question, which is, what are you playing for? Give me 5 things you're playing for. And he said, look at your life like in 10 years and think about what are the things that you want to achieve. And it kind of doesn't matter if you achieve those 5 things, but at least you're moving towards them and you're taking action every day to accomplish it or accomplish those goals. And it took me a while. Like he asked me like in, December, and I continued to think about it. I let it kind of sink in. I reflected over the holidays, and I didn't really get back to him until April. And even then I said, I don't know if these are like the for sure, but this is what I've landed on. And for me, it was like, it's important to me that I build um, authentic connections with the people around me. Specifically, my family, my husband, I want to stay married, etc. Um, Two, I said I want to be able to create beautiful things. Now, whether that is, whatever industry or whatever function, I want to be able to feel creative. I said I do want financial freedom. That's certainly, I don't want to have to worry about it. I don't know what that number is for me, but I don't want to feel like that I'm scared.
The way that I look at it is wealth building is like a chess match. It's like you against the elements of the universe. For me, having what I would consider appropriate wealth is just having the economic freedom to make that next move on the chessboard. But I don't know what that next move is because I don't know like the hand that's being dealt on the other side. But definitely freedom for me is a huge thing. If I don't have the economic wealth to make some choices that I am um, passionate about, then that would be a downer for me. So again, I don't know what that number is because everything's changing. There's inflation, going up like crazy. Housing, cost of living is going up like crazy. So it could be drastically different today versus 6 months from now. So I don't know if there is a solid number, but I know that it's a chess match. You just have to be sharp enough to be able to have the opportunity to make that next move and not get taken out. What about you, Jess?
I well, I just did those seminars, so I have my numbers. But I don't know. I mean, look, wealth to me is time. Wealth to me is time and health. Um, and not necessarily in that order. Health first, time, and it's I'm a creative person, and I just I want to feel inspired and passionate about what I'm doing. I want to make a difference in the world. I want to work with people who I love working with. I want to have the biggest amount of impact. And I think, in terms of wealth, like, yeah, I've, Natalie's touched on this earlier. Like, we're artists, so like, you don't really get into that to be rich, from wealthy from a money standpoint. You're driven by this desire to be creative and communicate and share your art. And it's hard to place a value on that because it's not, you're kind of just in the slog of riding that roller coaster of that career, at least at the start. And I don't know, I guess, yeah, wealth to me is time and freedom. And I know, I think at this point in my life, being in my, late 30s at this point, financial literacy, I'm spending a lot of time educating myself on investments and on, what I can be doing with the money that does come in. Because I hadn't spent time on that earlier, and I feel like I have a lot of catching up to do. But and I've done a lot of things I want. Not that my life's over, but I have checked off a bunch of bucket list items. I was just thinking about this morning where I'm like, okay, buckle down for the next couple years and really put your laser beam on this financial literacy thing and really understanding how to set yourself up so you're financially secure and free. And honestly, you guys, I will say, like, it's terrifying to have to sit down and put down a number. But it doesn't take as long as you think it does. It takes like maybe like an hour of really just focusing. And then when you work backwards from that, you're like, oh wow, okay, I can see that. That's logical. And it does kind of ingrain in your subconscious. So I think, I agree with you, Steve, that it's a chess match, but I also think it can't hurt to pick a target and then also not be afraid. Like we all talked about this in business, in being nimble enough to readjust it. Like Natalise, if you end up having, finding out that, you guys are having, you and your husband are having a kid, like you're going to change that, right? That number is going to shift. A bunch of other things are going to shift as well. So, I'm a firm believer in like sitting down and like picking these targets, but then really checking in on them and revising.
What are 3 things that you must do consistently to sustain a healthy way to think about wealth building? 3 things.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is the ability to not hinge your self-worth and identity on your wealth or on, whatever you're trying to accomplish. And I think that maybe speaks to any and every goal that you might have, because I think that's a dangerous thing to do.
Jess, want to throw us a nugget?
Yeah, I think definitely not hinging your self-worth is a massive thing. I would say humor too, just with all this, because it really is, money is absurd. It's a piece of paper that we decide means something. You know what I mean? Like everything, it's all kind of relative. Like I think if you're not enjoying the process and kind of able to just have humor and a little bit of fun with it, and again, like, I mean, even in the hard times, I think humor where you can.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this. I agree. I think tying your identity to money is a big no-no. That is a fastest way to disaster. I love the humor part. So I also believe that discipline, which is something that I need to be much better with, is absolutely critical. And by discipline, I mean habits or even micro habits, like doing things consistently, because at the end of the day, to build wealth, it is a process. It's just like, being able to be really good at jujitsu, you need 10,000 hours. To be able to play piano, you need 10,000 hours. To really do anything where you are moving yourself away from novice and becoming sort of like a master, you just need a lot of time. So in that regard, Jess, I agree with you. All the financial literacy courses, learning from people that have done it before. Yes, all that is important, but that won't mean much if we're not putting that into practice on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I would agree that it's definitely consistent action towards your goal, and maybe I just take that for granted because I just do. Like, it's like you don't see the thing that you do. Like, you just wake up every day and just try again, and just keep, consistently chipping away at all of it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, like this passion, this idea of knowing your passion, your purpose, and your principles is something that I was actually working on this morning before I started talking to you guys for this Unbeatable Mind challenge with Mark Divine. And I never thought, I always have the principles, like I have a get up, do this, do your schedule, like, and the passion, the purpose part is like the part that I kind of feel like is a shifting thing. And I don't know if you guys ever feel this as entrepreneurs, because once you start doing businesses that aren't necessarily yours, it is like, how do you maintain that discipline and that passion and keep it aligned with your purpose? So it is a consistent action, but I think it's also juggling those three balls in the air and making sure that not, any one of them is taking over or you're out of alignment.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm reading this book called The Art of Wealth. It's basically is an old Sanskrit translation by Thomas Clearly. And these are essays. These are really, really old essays, and the entire compilation is ultimately pointing you towards like acquiring wealth. But I would say that 99% of this book has nothing to do with money. Everything in this book has to do with like mindset, harmonizing with the world, not offending people, doing right. There's a lot of sort of, I don't know, Buddhist enlightenment in this book. And what I've come to realize after browsing through this thing a few times is that no one is going to be able to have what I guess we would consider a wealthy state of mind or wealthy state of health, even if we can't make peace with, or we can't really define what peace is to us. Because I think if you can have peace and have that balance and have passion, and that can be the common denominator for creativity, ultimately your imagination is going to go, you're going to create, and at the moment that you can find a way to transact through your creations, then you can start to acquire wealth. But according to this text, you can't get any of that if your life is out of balance and out of harmony. So with that being said, we're coming close to the end of this podcast, and I'm so excited about episode 4. We have Nina Bergman coming on, actress, singer, songwriter, activist. Jess, tell us a little bit more about Nina.
Oh yeah, we're going to be talking with one of my closest friends, Nina Bergman. She is a phenomenal, gosh, there's just too much. She's a multi-hyphenate. I mean, just model, actor, singer. She's signed to major labels. I mean, she does her own stunts. She's in a ton of films. Like, she's just a remarkable human being, and just has had a really unconventional journey. And we thought it'd be a great interview for listeners, and really excited to have her joining us.
Well, I'm super excited about that. So, guys, thank you for checking in with us this week. This is Stephen Khuong, along with Jess Furman and Natalise. We're signing out. Until next time, peace.